the way these underground papers worked was they were kind of ideologically amateur. They were modes of activism. People were activists first, and then they learned the skills required to kind of communicate that message. So if they needed a photographer to photograph a rally, you were going to learn how to use a camera. If we needed someone to stay up late and design it, some of these issues, the design changes issue per issue, like dramatically, because it was whoever was in the office. Sometimes it was the same person writing the article, laying it out, taking the photos, doing the little doodle drawings in between the columns, and then selling it on the street. That's the way these things kind of operated, which is a very kind of fertile territory for like free, kind of wild, modes of expression, I suppose, which is the kind of stuff I like. Yeah, so anyone who was in the room at the time could just do a little drawing. So you have these very, very amateur ones. Also, you could recycle any drawing from any other paper. So they would take like a Robert Crumb drawing, add something to it, use it in a flyer for an upcoming rally. They could reappropriate images. They kind of had a life of their own. So there was this kind of like dialogue going on where imagery was evolving, and becoming symbols of the counterculture, just kind of organically. The same drawing that was anonymous, like, I've seen there's a little girl kind of watering a tiny little weed plant that became like all over the place with different messages. Then I've seen it on T-shirts from the time. I've seen it on posters. I've seen it on incest burners. They were just like, this was imagery to be used freely for the sake and benefit of the movement. But it's also the underground press syndicate as a concept was a really kind of unique situation. I think like a phenomenon that hasn't ever been replicated, but nothing like it before or after. Essentially in the mid '60s, there were a bunch of kind of more like bigger city underground papers that were operating, and they felt that there would be a benefit in forming a kind of coalition. So there were five in the beginning: the Los Angeles Free Press, the East Village Other. These are kind of the bigger, more famous ones, and they created this collective called the Underground Press Syndicate. It was very loose. Like literally, it was called the UPS because someone saw a UPS truck driving by at the time.
Whoa, okay.
They thought it would be funny. So it was called the Underground Press Syndicate, and the only rules were that you could use any material from any other paper. They could share any other. It was non-proprietary, but you had to send a copy of your paper every issue to every other paper within the collective.
Oh, wow.
And that's what created this network, and that's how also articles and imagery would get recycled. But within a few years of starting with just five, towards the end of the '60s there were 500, and it was global, and there were millions of readers, and essentially it was this underground press network that fueled the entire counterculture in the '60s. It was what promoted these big music festivals. A lot of really serious countercultural authors from the time, the very famous ones from Hunter S. Thompson to Allen Ginsberg, were contributing to the Underground Press Syndicate, and in all elements from art. I think it really kind of influenced popular art. There's a lot of amazing fine artists from very serious museum artists like Ed Ruscha, who designed the logo for other scenes, to Robert Crumb. But also in literature, you had the gonzo amateur style of journalism, just sending kids out to like write about stuff, and they would get arrested at a protest. That really informed like the new journalism movement, of which Hunter S. Thompson is a major exponent. And Joan Didion said that to her, and I quoted this in the book, she said the underground press type of journalism was the only real kind of journalism because you knew the journalist's intentions from the jump. They weren't trying to pretend to be impartial. They weren't trying to hide their journalistic bias. They were just straight up reporting what happened to them and sharing their opinions. And they were reporting on things that mainstream newspapers weren't reporting on. At the time, newspapers were generally like regurgitating the government line on, the Vietnam War, ignoring a lot of, race inequity and and also a lot of stuff that was happening amongst like minority communities in in LA, for instance. You had in East LA, you had a lot of like part of the Chicano movement. There was a lot of student walkouts because of the inequalities in like public schools, and the LA Times just wasn't reporting on it. So the Los Angeles Free Press helped kind of amplify a small Chicano underground paper called La Raza. La Raza sent a bunch of journalists to cover this protest. They all got arrested, which means the next issue didn't come out. The LA Free Press put it out for them, reported what they had reported. And then these stories get picked up around the world by other, like, in Switzerland, you might have a paper reporting about what's happening, in East LA when the LA
Wow.
Times wasn't reporting on it. So it really gave a voice to communities that didn't have a voice, whether they were like radical revolutionary politicos, whether they were minority communities, or also they were just kind of like freaky people with crazy ideas. The kind of ideologies that they were espousing they were very serious about it. This is like in a time of like the Weathermen blowing up buildings. The Vietnam War by like 1970 71, it was kids were getting shot. You had Kent State, protesters were getting shot. This was really serious, and people were willing to go to extremes to overthrow the kind of dominant paradigm. So, and that's how that's where you get like a weed leaf and a machine gun crossed over, because that was believed to be a means of revolution.